Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Find Yourself in a Character, my weekly video series that takes us on an exploration of some of my favorite characters and their journeys. I'm Jenny D, author, consultant, and international promoter of Love and Triumph. In this week's episode, I'm going to be talking about a much older book, not a new release. I'll be talking about The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Now, I was introduced to this book by a new friend of mine who we were sharing like what our favorite books were, and he had referenced this as a mindgasm. So of course I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. But what was interesting about this book, so it's a book based on patterns of success. But unlike a lot of other books that I've read before in this genre, it wasn't like what you have to do to be a success. It wasn't like the key factors that you need to succeed, right? Because I can get lost in some of that and feel overwhelmed. Like, am I doing enough? Am I being enough? But this took a really unique perspective in that it analyzed patterns that we normally wouldn't identify as successful or like success indicators, and give me a book that analyzes and compares and draws patterns and all that kind of stuff, and I am hooked. So I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. But what fascinated me was that somebody took the time to draw these patterns. Like, for instance, they talk about hockey players and how the majority of them are born in the month of January. And it was funny because those who know me know I'm a lover of astrology. And he was like, well, it has nothing to do with astrology. I was like, I'm sure it does. You just don't know it yet. But the actual reality was, he explained it as the training that goes on is over a year period, right? So kids who are born in January have those extra months of mature development. And so they're better set up than those, say, born in November. And not to say that November kids can't be successful, but it's just like the learning curve of the maturity of where you are in life, even in a short amount of a year, because our brains develop so quickly, like through childhood. And so that was really fascinating to read. And then he's talking about these levels of intelligence that, we know there's academic intelligence, emotional intelligence, and then he also introduces the concept of practical intelligence, which is kind of like common sense or like social intelligence. And to see how it worked, how there's kind of a threshold on how high your IQ is. So you may have a high IQ, but it doesn't mean that those with IQs higher are more successful, because it's more about experience. It plays the whole nature versus nurture thing, like what opportunities are presented to you. What I lost my train of time. So anyway, it goes beyond what your IQ is, and it's your ability to adapt to your environment. And that led to something else, which was your family background. Now, you wouldn't think that that was something that would be a pattern of success. You would think, like, you've heard the rags to riches story or something like that, but he's like, no, it wasn't. It's not necessarily if you come from nothing that you become something. It was more like, given an example of like a certain ethnicity ended up being more successful than expected in a current job during a current time period, because their ancestors had instilled a certain work ethic, a certain skill set that was needed. So when the need arose at the right time, they had it to rise up above other people who you would normally think, with their level of education and everything, for instance, would be able to succeed. So there's time periods and there's opportunity. And it was just absolutely fascinating to read all these connections. And there are people that were born in certain years in a certain field, for example, like, I can't think, my mind's going blank right now. There was just so much data that I couldn't absorb it all, but it was amazing to see how it all matched up, like over a period of 5 years, there are multiple people born and they all run similar businesses, for example, but it wasn't their birth or just the time period. It was the opportunities presented to them. It was the fact that not just that they worked 10,000 hours consistently on this skill to be that great at it. It was the opportunities that arose for them to do it in unlikely circumstances. College kids who didn't have access to money, but somehow got free access to these resources type thing. So if you want a little bit of a different perspective on how to be successful, I mean, I looked at it and I'm going, okay, I was born in this year. What's the current trends? I'm a September baby. Does that work against me? So like, what's my IQ? Oh, yeah, I took an IQ test and I do recognize that IQ is not always an indicator and that you need other levels of intelligence. And that smarts are not all it. But it was just really a cool read, a fresh perspective on something. It kind of gives you hope because what maybe somebody might be seen as an underdog actually has an outlier potential within them based upon when they're born or their family background or opportunities that may arise. So if you're curious to check it out, again, it's The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and it really gets your brain thinking. And if you need to get that little brain stimulated beyond just, fictional books and everything, I highly recommend it. It's really cool to read because you find things very interesting, the connections that are drawn. So that is my assessment for this week. I will see you next week where you can find yourself in a character.